Of late, I've found that a lot of religious arguments seem to centre around more the kind of vague and woolly concepts. So, philosophy, for example, which has been functionally useless since natural philosophy became science, or ideas around morality. The idea apparently being that if evolutionary science and other sciences cannot explain human morality, then that somehow leaves the door open for God. Or Jordan Peterson's argument, which seems to boil down to religion is useful. He believes in belief, as Dennett puts it. But these have issues of their own, and there are explanations for human morality, but to get to them, you have to cast aside this notion of a purely objective morality. There is no purely objective morality. It's subjective, it's situational. It depends upon the circumstances in which one finds oneself. Any true morality would be adjustable to an extent. For example, we can say that theft is wrong, but we can also understand that maybe it's not wrong or it's less wrong if it's the only means you have in order to feed your children. Most of us would be at least somewhat forgiving towards a shoplifter who was only stealing food to feed their children, baby formula or whatever. So you can see straight away that circumstances and situation makes a difference. And another argument against a kind of pure objective morality is that there are competing moral systems that claim to be objective, pure and absolute moralities. Even within the Abrahamic religions, you have Islam, Judaism and Christianity competing, and even within those you have competing sects with different ideas about what is or isn't sinful, what is or isn't okay. So immediately, straight away, if you're trying to make an argument for a perfect and objective religious morality, you're screwed, because religions can't agree, even if they share the same root, even if they share the same name, even if they share the same book. People can't seem to agree on a single perfect morality for everyone. Even within the Bible, for example, because most of these arguments are coming from Christians, it says killing people is wrong, and yet the God that's telling you that killing people is wrong cannot even stick to its own objective moral standard. Within the context of the narrative, it commits genocide, it orders genocide, it kills people, it tortures people, it does all these horrible things. So clearly that moral stricture is not objective, because even the one laying down that law is incapable or unwilling to adhere to it, making it sinful by its own standard. So I think we can toss out the idea of a truly, absolutely objective morality straight away. Now, much of this poppycock comes from a Christian site, ironically named Stand to Reason. Ironically, because reason will not take you to religion. Reason will take you out of religion. But that's by the by. It has this page with 4 objections to an evolutionary basis to morality. And the first one is that they claim you can't derive an ought from an is. But again, I think you can. I think it's worth watching Sam Harris's TED Talk on how science can answer moral and ethical questions to get a baseline understanding of where I would be coming from in this. But while we can't say that there is an objective morality to the universe or any inherent defined purpose to humanity, we can look at what we are, how we have evolved, our closest relatives and so on, and we can make certain statements about humans that appear certainly to be true. We are a social species, but we are a social species on a sort of broader troop level, similar to other apes and monkeys. They live in these extended family groups where most of the members share a few genes. So from a genetic level, from the selfish gene perspective, they have reasons to be altruistic to each other. And if there is a basis for human morality, it appears to be that altruism is generally good and selfishness is generally bad. We become outraged when people cheat, we become outraged when people steal, we become outraged when people hide secrets from us, when people cheat in mating strategies and other areas of life. Monkeys will be outraged if they witness unfairness. If you give one monkey an extra banana, the other monkey is, oh, where the fuck's my banana? You can see all of these threads in humanity, but that's humanity. This whole basis appears to come from our evolutionary ancestry. We're a cooperative species. Our young take a long time to rear. You can see how these things would influence and affect us, and how we interact and how we behave. But even so, this is just a basis. If we were another species, we might have an entirely different kind of morality. If you look at the extreme social end, because it's easier to illustrate, you can look at hive species like ants or bees. Individual bees are just part of the hive, part of the whole. They are absolutely self-sacrificing. They don't reproduce, they don't mate, only the queen does, but they all share genes with the queen. They all share genes with the rest of the hive. The hive as a whole is their way of perpetuating those genes, but individual drones are entirely irrelevant, sacrificial. They will literally work themselves to death. They don't have to be whipped, they don't have to be coerced. It's their natural instinct to completely sacrifice themselves for the collective, the hive. We're not that extreme. We form tribes, we form groups, we form kinship groups. And that seems to be the basis. We are a cooperative species, but we're also individualistic because we don't form that big groups. It can be hard for us to form attachments to people with whom we don't share genes, with whom we don't share a broader perspective. This is where society and mental programming, our capacity to reason, our capacity to think, our capacity to empathize and so on, these start to interfere. And the societies that we build and the moral systems that we build are tools, just as much as an axe or a hammer or a wheel. These are ways we seek to, better and improve our societies and make them run more smoothly. But weirdly, we seem to be hidebound to tradition when it comes to these moral systems in a way that we're not with other tools that we create. We are always looking for a better mousetrap. We're not always looking for a better moral system when maybe we should be, because these hidebound religious systems don't work. So can we derive an ought from an is? To an extent, we can look at our evolutionary ancestry. We can see what potentially works for humans, why we're wired the way that we are, how we can possibly fulfill our needs, but we don't go on pure instinct. Above that level, we have this level of consciousness, of understanding. We can regard our system, we can look at the broader perspective, we can empathize with others. But what ought is that we ought to be looking for systems that maximize human fulfillment and happiness. And we derive that from our evolutionary ancestry and our drive, which gives us these perspectives on what we want. And we then temper that with these mental tools we create, these moral, ethical, political and economic systems. So you can, but there might be many oughts, and different oughts might have different effects, and many ises have different effects on those oughts. It's a very complex and emergent system, very difficult to understand, and as Sam Harris puts it, there may be many different ways of going about things that are equally effective. But we can experiment, and we can look around, and we can find out, and we can judge from the past. But we can derive oughts from ises. There just may be many oughts, and the is can change. The second objection is, if anything, even harder to fathom. Their objection seems to be that an evolutionary morality changes, which obviously is the point of evolution. Adaptation is constantly ongoing. They try to assert evolution is arbitrary, which it isn't. It's an adaptation to whatever best perpetuates survival. And yes, the same would be true of evolutionary morality. As we covered earlier, morality is circumstantial. It's affected by the circumstances and the context in which we find ourselves. And the complaint in this article that things that are considered virtuous in one context would be considered immoral in another, well, that's the very point. We can always think of circumstances that change how we would react to an action. Killing might be bad, but if a terrorist had an atomic bomb in the middle of a big city and said either the president kills himself or I detonate this bomb, the moral choice becomes for the president to kill himself, due to the comparison in damage. So, it just seems inherent and obvious, I think, to anyone with any sense that morality can shift and probably should shift. Dawkins has said this too. Just because this is the way things are in a state of nature doesn't mean that we have to continue to go along with them. We are conscious, aware beings. We can see ways potentially to improve upon nature, just as we have with other tools. It might be evolutionarily true that men are more disposable than women, but we can still empathize with men, and we can wish to minimize that disposability or get rid of it altogether. And yet, should some kind of big human species threatening event come along, then men are simply more disposable, and we will have to suck it up and deal with it, and that will be the moral truth. So contexts change, issues change. The internal combustion engine may have been a great idea at one point, and then the pollution got too bad, and the lead poisoning from the petrol and everything else that has gone on. Contexts shift, and this is as true of societies and politics and ideologies and economies and everything, as much as the physical situations in which we find ourselves, the things that normally drive evolution in all living things. So yeah, this is a strength of the idea, and it's an inherent truth of the idea. I think at one point human sacrifice was considered moral because people thought it could affect the harvests or whatever. Now we know better and we don't kill people. So yes, evolution has changed. This is a good thing. I don't understand why this is an objection. The third objection almost makes some kind of sense, and it's the idea that evolutionary morality explains morality away, in that morality is based on fitness rather than truth. To an extent, this is actually true as an objection. Our moral systems have probably evolved as a means by what leads us to survive, rather than what's true. But this is kind of shooting yourself in the foot as a religion, because it means that this morality that you are so insistent upon has evolved because of its usefulness, as Jordan Peterson seems to believe, not for being true. I think it was Napoleon who said, religion's good for keeping people in line, and that's certainly true. Ideological systems, brainwashing and so on don't have to be true in order to be useful, but that is still based upon a fundamental truth, that people can be fooled and controlled. So, you're making a tool out of your morality in order to control people. Even so, and this is the closest thing that I think closest as the thing gets to a genuine objection. But even so, it's still based on a truth. So, but this is just explains where morality comes from. It's not really a strike against it. It's an explanation of what it is and how it has come about. And that's really it. So I don't think this is a reason to tear down the idea of evolutionary morality. More, it's an objection to the fact that we have an evolutionary morality. And I think a lot of rationalists and skeptics would agree to that point, that truth should be a better value. But we can still see that it's true that lying, creating false moral systems, can sometimes be useful. So I don't think this is a reason to toss it out, but it's a reason to examine the moralities that we have and to see whether we hold to them because they're true or because we think they're useful. The final objection is that this sort of evolutionary view of morality undermines morality and brings it all into question. How can we trust any of these convictions that we might have that stem from our evolutionary past if they're not contingent on being true, if it's just their utility that means we have them? However, we have realized this, and as well as our instinct, we have our intellect. We can examine these moral issues. We can consider them, and we can set our intellect against our instinct. And we can see that there might be better ways. We can try and understand the objections that we have and to see whether they make any sense to us, which they often don't when you really think about it. So it's just hard to see why this is an objection. This is a reason to examine our moralities, and again it undermines itself here, because this doesn't say that this view isn't true. It's an argument over utility and whether things that are true are useful. Generally, things that are true are more useful. So again, it is true that false moralities can be useful for controlling people, controlling societies, and so on. But in order to recognize that, you first have to recognize that that's true. So truth is what underlines it all. It's really hard to see any of these objections, and none of them are really objections to whether this view of morality is true. They're all objections that it's somehow undermines the moral system that this person, in this case Christian, happens to have chosen. You've just chosen an off-the-peg morality, which religions often apply with a degree of absolutism, which is maladaptive. It's not capable of adapting. An evolutionary view of morality can see that we probably need to adapt and shift and change our systems over time to adapt to the circumstances and the situations in which we find ourselves. And that seems to me to be a better way to go about it from a position of truth as well. Because you have to recognize the world that you're in order to construct tools that operate better within the world. And that is a truth. Zang.